Okay, thank you, Linda, and good evening once more, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly, and you can also see my screen. Can you? I just need to make sure that I can see at least one person. Right. Cool. Okay. Good evening again once more. And it's indeed a great pleasure to be with you all. I would have loved this to be in person, but yeah, the current COVID arrangement does not really allow us, like was explaining. It's always very lovely to meet you all and go out birding and to share a cake or drink with you, talk about birds. And today I'm going to talk more about the role of citizen scientists and the contribution they play to this massive biodiversity conservation that we are all passionate about. But a little bit about me, I'm Simeon Bezeng, like Linda said, I'm originally from Cameroon, but I'm a permanent resident now in South Africa. I completed my PhD from the University of Johannesburg, where I studied plant invasion, and you see some of the role of citizen science data that played in helping me complete my studies. So I joined BirdLife in 2018 to support BirdLife more on a regional role, help them build capacity in other countries to mobilize biodiversity data that can be used to report on biodiversity and making sure countries are protecting their biodiversity. And I remember meeting Linda in one of the board meetings. She invited me to join the Rand Babbitt Bird Club. And then I was really oblivious to birds. And I remember really those early days when I used to go to the Kruger, I was more passionate about looking at bigger things like your southern ground hornbill and really not looking at anything small. But nowadays I find myself, and I even when I joined the bird club, I made a promise to myself that once I get my list to about 200 species, then I'll stop looking at birds. But I'm so addicted. I'm so addicted. This birding thing is it's not easy. I don't know how you guys do it. It's so addictive. I find myself driving when I'm driving to work, when I'm driving out of town, my head is out of the window trying to check what is out there. And I've become a huge addict to watching birds. And I've enjoyed quite a lot of some of those outings that we've been as a club. Can you see the screen? I'm trying to move it away. I don't know how to move this. Is it on my presentation, Linda? Can you see the screen?
I can see your presentation. Is it not moving?
No,
and
no,
your laser pointer is moving.
There's like the menu bar that is on top of it. So I'm just wondering if you see it. This one that, can you see this one? No?
Where are you pointing, Simeon? Show me.
So there's a menu bar on top of my presentation, but if you can't see it, then it's fine. I guess I'm the only one who can see it.
No, I can't see it.
Okay, perfect. I'm just trying to.
Now you need to advance your slide.
Leave. Is it leave or? Sorry. Okay, I'll just leave it at this point. Okay. I will start my presentation now. Can you see the next slide?
No.
No.
I'm afraid you might have to exit your PowerPoint presentation and come back in. There we go. Okay. Great. We can see your next slide. There we go. Perfect.
All right. So, who is a citizen scientist? A citizen scientist really refers to a non-scientist that participate in a voluntary manner in any conventional scientific research. So we do this for fun. We go out, we sight birds, we look at birds, we contribute data that goes to help either save bird species or to answer certain ecological questions that are related to birds that are related to plants, that are related to anything out there that is not registered by conventional scientists. And again, I take this picture from, this is a photo credit from Linda. I guess it's one of the birding outing, and I've used this picture again for a newsletter article that I wrote for the IUCN on the value of using citizen science data to be able to confirm species presence at site, because the data you collect is super important and so relevant to the kind of work we do. But if you can imagine bird life, for example, we have less than 15 conservation staff. If all of us are supposed to go out there and collect this data, we will never be able to collect the amount of data that is being produced by citizen scientists. So the role of citizen science or scientists in providing this data is really massive, especially in the face of the current financial crisis, where conservation organizations have been really hit hard and the money is not usually enough. This data really is super invaluable to the kind of work we do. So I would like to take you through the various platforms that are available out there for collecting citizen science data. What kind of data do we usually collect? And how is this data really used in terms of answering or saving species? Just to start, say over the last 2 decades, nature-based citizen scientists has flourished due to the many innovations in terms of the technology that has allowed us to develop new devices, to create new digital platforms that can be used to collect and accurately classify species in terms of where they occur. And if we look at, I'm just going to move this again so that I can see. If we look at so far, the kind of tools that are available out there, I admire so many of you when we go out, the kind of cameras that you carry, the kind of binoculars that you carry, and the kind of devices that you carry just to collect this data. And the most familiar one that we are really used to is the Birdlasser app. We also have the eBird, some of you really use. We have our binoculars. And then the picture to my top right is really not a mistake, because when I posted this picture on Facebook, people were like, no, but you're not using your binoculars rightly. And this is really like a seasoned botanist. When I traveled to Kenya, I went to the Catamayo forest, where we just went to see birds and other plants. And if you look at plant tissue, be it the leaf, for example, in an inverse direction and facing towards the sun, you'll be able to see internal structures that are really magnified. So that is what he was trying to explain to me, and I could see some internal structures of the leaf I was holding. And then when we start looking at the various platforms that are available out there, like I said, we have the Birdlasser, we have the eBird. This is very familiar amongst the birding community. But we have also iNaturalist. I saw a few of you will be familiar, or maybe most of you will be familiar with iNaturalist. And we're going to look at iNaturalist more in details. These are all citizen science platforms. We've got iSpot, we've got the custodian of rare and endangered wildflower, crew that is run by Sanbi. We've got eMammals, we've got observation.org. These are all online platforms. I've also got like social media platforms like Facebook, for example. I'm also on this invasive and exotic plant species in South Africa. This is a really cool group where new sighting of invasive species are posted on a regular basis, either in a farm, in your backyard, wherever you are. You just need to take a picture of the plant, a description of where the plant, the picture was taken, and any feature that is surrounding that plant. So let's really look at the most familiar one that I'm sure perhaps 90% of the the members here have, is the bird laser. And at this point, if most of you can just turn onto your bird laser, if you open your app, the really interesting thing here is to be able to ask, what do you feel are the data sets you collect once you open your bird laser app, you log on a species, and you move on to the next? Which kind of information are you collecting? Are you even aware of the kind of information are you collecting? What level of citizen science, what level are you at in terms of contribution? Because some people will just log a bird, but some people will go more into the details to look at maybe the number of birds that were in that area, the location, the habitat. So if we start diving deep into bird laser, once you open the app, you'll be able to see, for example, this is the most important thing, or the most important page that most people see. And it was quite surprising when I started birding, because the birding community uses the common name for birds. For us in the plant community, this is crazy. You can't even dare to use a common name for plants, because common names usually vary from place to place. For example, in South Africa, we could have a plant species with a common name that is completely different to people that are in Soweto or in KZN. And if we start using common names, it becomes very confusing. So we stick to the conventional scientific name, which is the binomial, your species and your genus. So this is the most common data we collect. So this is a favorite bird that I see mostly in my garden, the greenwood hoopoe. So you can see the common name there. And then if you go to the top right there, you can see the altitude, which is the distance above sea level. And then it gives you the location of where the bird was sighted. And really, really important is this data, the XY coordinate of the area where this was sighted. So the longitude and the latitude where the species was collected. And you will start seeing the importance of all this data as we move further into the presentation. And then we look at the accuracy. I think this is not really important for birds, but for plants, it's super important, because I mean, if you have to say exact, it means you are almost at the same position with the birds, which is not possible. But you can give a dimension, an estimate of maybe like within 500, within 100. But this is like a default setting for all your observations. Then we start looking at some phenological data that is also connected. We look at the date, we look at the time. All this kind of information is really important to start looking at seasonal events that are happening with birds. You know, when do the birds start coming back? When do they migrate? When do they come back? When are they active? And then we look at other things like sound, acoustic. So most of this, you know, is really important, especially when you start confirming the presence of a species at site. So we will never really use any information that is heard. We really want physical presence. We want something that has been cited with an evidence. But again, sound data is really important in terms of many acoustic applications. So you either, when you scroll down into your sighting, you can either say it's a bird species that was it's the sound, or you really saw the species. Was it then you start getting some kind of uncertainty in terms of the count. So when you see a bird, how many of them were there? Is it an exact number, 2, 5, 20, or is it an estimate, more than 30, more than 300? So you could really include that kind of information as well. Then we start looking at some habitats or habit in terms of the species. Where is the species found? What kind of habitat? Is it the savanna? Is it the forest? You can really include this kind of data. And I encourage you, it's quite time consuming to be able to fill this information. But the more information you provide is really, really helpful to the conservation community. Then you start looking at the feeding behavior, looking at the breeding also. Then really, really important information also is about the reproduction of the species. This is information that is linked to the reproduction. So the age of the species, the adult, what is really important with with defining an adult is to be able to tell if the species is able to reproduce. So for a species population to sustain above a certain generation, they need to be able to reproduce. So you need to have good numbers of male and female that are mature and are capable of reproducing. Then immature individuals, juveniles, this one also is also a matrix to show that the population of that species is capable of reproducing. Then you can now see the number of male and the number of females. So all this kind of information is important if you have them. So we have taken a deep dive into like the bird Lassa app. There are other apps like I've shown you, eMamas, you have the eBird, you have the Crew, many other ones that could be used. iNaturalist is almost the same process that is taken to collect the information. So now we start looking at what kind of information is collected apart from those core ones that I've shown you. There are many other information that is collected as well. So for citizen science, like I briefly mentioned, we really offer a low-cost approach for collecting species occurrence information at large spatial scale. So Linda was telling you about the various outing events that have been planned for the year, going to the Western Cape, going to KZN, in Gauteng around here. So you can really collect information across a large spatial scales that will really be very expensive, like I said, for only the few bird life staffs to be able to go out there and collect this information. And when we start looking at what information is collected, like I showed you, is the location, which is really, really important, the XY coordinate, the longitude and the latitude for the species. And in the slides ahead, we're going to see how this information is important for conservation. We look at the abundance, how many of those species were cited. You know, like for most people, when they cite those species, they say 200 exact amount, greater than 500, you can make an estimate. You can really be uncertain in terms of providing this estimate. So you can give a range, 50 to 100, because I mean, birds at times, they really do not want human interference. So when they see any disturbance, they have to fly away. So you can really give that range of uncertain range of data. Then population here, we mean both mature and immature. So it's the size of the individual, particular individual of a species. You know, let's just say blue crane, not just birds, but a blue crane. That is the population of blue crane. And then you can collect. You can say we have about 200 species of blue crane in a farm or in a water body, wherever you find the species. Then we can also get some phenological data, and phenology really is important for seasonal events. So when plant or when birds, in the context of birds, when birds flesh, when they migrate, all those things, we can collect that information as well. And then you can also look at community composition. So you look at what is the bird sharing the habitat with, what other plant species, what habitat type, what water body. You know, you can really collect that kind of information as well and document in your in the app you are using. And again, here is just to say with the limited budgets to pay for professional scientists, science really is not a lucrative profession anymore as compared to the 80s. Most people now prefer to go into law, journalism, sports, and the budget for science or conservation is really small. So the kind of information that citizen scientists collect when they go out monitoring or citing birds is super important for reporting on rare events, and it really makes sense for some of the on-the-ground conservation efforts that BirdLife as a birds NGO or any other organization is performing to be able to protect birds. And then when we look at some of the projects, like some of the citizen science projects, For those of you that are familiar or not familiar with a platform like iNaturalist, so what really happens is a mobile app. So you get your phone app, you take a picture of a bird, an insect, a plant, and then you post it on the app. And what happens is it goes to the online platform where people can actually validate to say this is an acacia species, this is a greenwood whoople, and the number of IDs, exact IDs that are gotten for that species now tends to be confirmed as the ID for that species. But again, for other applications like the observation.org, we kind of have like a middleman in between your community here, who is a professional that will vet every identification before it's now posted on your interface, your platform. So iNaturalist is one of those kind of platform. It's almost like your bird lasser. I think there's also an expert that sits behind the platform that looks at every observation. For example, if there's a bird that occurs only in the Karoo and you mistakenly say you've seen it in the savannah, I've seen ants in many occasions that will query some of those observations. So you have this kind of people in the background that can understand the distribution of the species, but also some of those what we intentionally call misidentifications are not. For example, we have so many species now that are shifting their ranges with climate change, and species are really migrating away from conditions that are not favorable anymore for them. And then an important one that I've really been involved in is a citizen science project like your invasive species BioBlitz. So a BioBlitz is an event that focuses on finding or identifying as many species as possible in a specific area within a given period of time, so usually 24 hours. And in my early career days, when I was still a student at the university, we had a very good, we had a partnership with Toyota where they gave us like the latest Bakis, like the 2021 Baki. And we will always go out to the field, go out to rough terrain. So it was almost like a win-win for both of us. We go out, we test drive this in rough terrains, and then it goes back to the workshop for verification. And in that process, we are now able to collect plant species along the way. And here, this was a BioBlitz for invasive species, where we collected invasive species in the Cape Floristic region. And we could see some really cool things like biological control on some acacia species. We collected several water invasive species, and also just collecting species that were sent to the herbarium for other research. And through this initiative, we partnered with the government program at the time, I think it's still ongoing, that is called Working for Water, that really helps in clearing invasive species, identifying invasive species, removing invasive species. And some of the plants we collected at that time were also used for conventional research. So a lot of my studies in those days focused on some of these plants. We collected the plants, we pressed them. I don't know, there's a thing here that is standing on. I don't know if you can see this, but this is the plant press that we are preparing. It's almost like taking a plant, putting them in newspapers, and then sending them to the herbarium where all plant collections are kept. And then from there, if you have any challenges, you can go into a herbarium, open the plant, study the plant. If you want to study the flowers, if you want to study the biogeography of the plant, you can as well go there and collect. And through this process, you could see here, we were using other citizen science platform. This was only based for the iPhones. And here also, you can collect the flower of the plant. You can collect really much information about the habitat. You can collect information about the flowering of the plant. You can collect the exact location of the plant. And all this information is sent to a centralized database and is used by not only us, but so many other scientists across the world for helping to save or conserve plants. Then another very important one is this BioBlitz that was conducted in the Babanango Game Reserve in KwaZulu-Natal. Linda, I don't know what bird is this. If anyone can help, it's so beautiful, but I don't know what bird is this. I just took this off their website. Can anyone help with this? Anyone aware? Ah, okay, great. So this was a BioBlitz that was done to discover plants and bird species that inhabit this game reserve. And the real purpose of all of this really is to create a comprehensive list of all the species that occur across the reserve. This is super important, especially for reserve managers, to be able to attract visitors also who want to come and visit this reserve. So it's more like a way of attracting people to come and see what kind of birds. And I know for the birds fanatics especially, there are people that really want to tick off a particular bird on their list, and they will be able to drive to these areas to see. And it's also very important in terms of like tracking biodiversity changes through time as the reserves develop. So you can know from maybe in 2000 what bird species were there, and over the years, 10 years down the line, what other bird species are we noticing in the game reserve. And it can really also help in terms of like managing the species and the different ecosystems that are found in the game reserve. And so citizen science involvement in biodiversity conservation over the year has really advanced our knowledge of wildlife patterns. And here we can see many applications. I'll go a bit into some of them. Through these approaches, we've seen the discovery of new species just by collecting data, putting them on the app, something that you're so curious about, you might not even know it's a new species. And things like this have helped to increase the number of species that are out there by discovering of new species. We have used citizen science data for species distribution models. I'll explain more about this, to identify hotspots where you can see species or where species can occur. And for the red list that BirdLife and myself also are pioneering, to evaluate the conservation status of species. So we want to know which species are threatened with extinction, which species are extinct, which ones are critically endangered, and which ones are common. So we can really use that information that is provided by the citizen science community to be able to tell this kind of story. And then for the key biodiversity area, like I said, we really use it to be able to confirm the presence of species at site. As you know, BirdLife and many conservation NGOs are really suffering with the capacity to be able to go out there and monitor species. So the contribution of citizen science in terms of confirming the presence of species at site is really important. So also monitoring the spread of invasive species. I showed you the online Facebook post and the group that I'm involved in, and text assessments and field validation of imagery. So all the pictures that you take, some citizen science platforms are really out there just to capture images. So you identify plants based on imaging, and you have people that volunteer that time just to like identify those species based on the image. And then contribution to your SABA project, your bird project. This is like an invaluable tool in terms of like the number of records, and I will show you a few examples of the records that come in through this platform. Linda, I need to know how I'm doing on time and how much time I have. So you're on mute, Linda.
Pardon, unmute. Okay, so yes, we're at 20 to 8 now. So if you could wrap up in the next 10 to 15 minutes and 5 minutes for questions, that would be great.
Okay, perfect. I will not really go into all of the examples, but I show you, like you can see, this is someone that is hiking and just taking pictures of flowers and all these kind of events, not just flowers, but insects, birds, other plants. They have been used to discover many species, rare and new species. And some of these have been named after, like, you know, your influential people that have been supporting conservation actions, like Leonardo DiCaprio. Some of these species have been named after them. And this is something that came out from my PhD, a study that I published, we use citizen science data from iSpot, iNaturalist, GBIF to be able to identify hotspots for invasive trees in South Africa. So these are the areas where managers can really target in terms of clearing and controlling invasive species. And for the IUC and Red List, we have, this is one of the biggest prioritization tools. So we don't have the money to be able to save every species, but which are those species that if we don't save might go extinct? And what are the tools that we can use to be able to identify those kind of species? One of them is the Red List of Threatened Species, and we have used citizen science data from iNaturalist, GBIF. These are all online citizen science platforms, BirdLassa, to be able to evaluate the conservation status of species. For example, which species is extinct, like the dinosaurs. These are species that we have no, there's no evidence that the species is present in the wild or in captivity. And when we say species is extinct in the wild, they are only present in captivity, they are not longer in their natural state. And when we say a species is critically endangered, for example, these are species that are facing extremely high risks of extinction, endangered, they are facing very high risks of extinction, vulnerable, they are facing high risks of extinction. And then list or near threatened, for example, they don't qualify in any of these threatened category, but are just very close to meeting that threshold. And least concern, for example, are species that are like your egret, they are out there, they are abundant, they are not faced by any threat, and data deficient. We really do not have enough information to be able to apply this standard on those species. And so all this data that you collect really saves to be able to move some of those species from data deficient to either least concern or threatened species. And then when we say species is not evaluated, it's not been evaluated on any of these categories of the IUCN. And for example, I just wanted to show you quickly with the blue crane. If you look at, these are all the records of blue cranes that have been sighted in South Africa. And you can use this record to be able to calculate some certain parameters of the red list based on the geographic range. And if you could see here, if you just Google the blue crane, you will see that it's currently listed as vulnerable on the red list of threatened species. So it's actually threatened, but on that vulnerable category. And I wanted to show you a walkthrough on that, but we really do not have time. And then on the KBA front, we are all versed with the IBAs, which is important bird and biodiversity areas. And this is a knowledge product of BirdLife. But the conservation community said for many, many years, we have the IBAs, we have the important plant areas, important butterfly areas, but birds do not live in isolation. Birds need, they need other biodiversity. They need plants, they feed on insects, they feed on snakes. And so why can we not have a standard that is called key biodiversity areas, which are just areas that are globally significant for biodiversity? And again, photo credit to Linda. This is a picture where I also use in my my newsletter article that I wrote for the IUCN, where we see the value of citizen science data in terms of like citing species, confirming species presence at site, that normal conservation NGOs do not really have the capacity to be able to provide that data. So it's really a valuable data set that is contributed by this community of practice. And just in South Africa, for example, you can see some of the activities of citizen scientists in terms of providing that data. And here I just wanted to highlight where some people really go further in terms of like saying we have 50 plants in 500 meters of reach. So those are like, that's like a really important information that can be used to say, okay, for sure, the species is present at site, but not just saying the location is present at this location. This is a maximum size that we can really say is sufficient for the population to persist. And then monitoring of invasive species, like I showed you with the Facebook and many other apps like the IMAP invasive, where you map where invasive species are. And that record is now being pulled together in a centralized database for people to use to answer conservation questions. And then really, really the last example is this SABAP data across a few Southern African countries, but look at the number of records that are produced each year, close to 2 million distribution records. This is massive. I mean, we don't get this in many African countries, but this contribution is super important just to confirm the existence of species at site, to know if the species are still thriving. And this is really the valuable contribution of all this network, citizen science network. And again, the value of that data set is really used, like I showed you, to determine the conservation status of species of birds. You want to know what red list category they are found in, correctly assigning their red list status, establishing important bird and biodiversity areas, IBAs, which have been a very important knowledge product of bird life, and forming the basis for environmental impact assessment. So many companies, before they want to develop, you need to know the impact of your development on biodiversity. So let me see, I think I have 7 more minutes. Yeah, I'll be able to finish this in 7 minutes. Although there's this important contribution that citizen science produced in terms of biodiversity conservation, there are also many challenges, you know, with the why we have these various data sets. We have not been able to, for example, extend our citizen science reach to other areas that are less privileged. I mean, what we see in South Africa and maybe Kenya, to the best of my knowledge, these are the 2 countries where you have a huge you have a huge community of practice for citizen scientists. But in other African countries, we really do not have this, and we've not really have that opportunity to be able to expand to reach other countries. And then we don't really have a lot of peer learning amongst the different citizen scientists and the platforms, just for experience and lesson sharing. And then also in terms of the development, for those that develop this platform, they need to make it really easy to use, like the bird laser. Most of the people that are using this are not technology friendly. So it really needs to be something that you can just log in and then press a button and you get the sighting. Gosh, okay. Here, I just wanted to talk to you more about why we should keep supporting this initiative. There was an EP-based report. This is a global report that was produced that showed that approximately 1 million species have gone extinct. And we know the importance of biodiversity to humankind, the ecosystem services they produce or they give us. We cannot continue to allow biodiversity to decline. And we continuously to see a disconnect between biodiversity and development priorities. For example, if you read more about this, this is the China's Belt and Road Initiative. So it's a massive development that China is leading across Africa, where they want to connect most African countries to their development route. And you see that it's really, those routes are passed, or the projects are passing across several African countries, across many important places for biodiversity, but yet we don't have that information to be able to support, or many African countries do not have the information to be able to support this kind of development. And one of them is like, you know, Total, the oil company that wants to build a massive pipeline across the heart of Africa with devastating effects for biodiversity and also livelihood. But again, if we had accurate biodiversity data that is also contributed by citizen scientists, who will be able to support such kind of development. And what is this? What is here is really an overlay, a map between your protected areas in red and your mining concessions in yellow. So you really see that mining is happening within protected area. This is not. This is something that is akin. Is not akin to. It's akin to many African countries. You see similar things that are happening, where mining is happening in protected areas where biodiversity is supposed to be. And here we know Africa is like home to biodiversity. But again, most African countries have not been able to produce that biodiversity data to support development. For example, we have eight of the 16 biodiversity hotspots in Africa. So a biodiversity hotspot is really an area of extremely high biodiversity and endemism. So endemism is where a species is only found in a particular area and nowhere else in the world. And for example, I thought we had much time, but we really don't have. These are some really cool birds that attract lots of visitors. Yeah, they attract lots of visitors to these areas. And we really need to be able to protect these birds because they bring in revenue to the local communities, and we need to save them, and we need to continue our citizen science initiatives to be able to contribute the data that can help save the species. Okay, my very last slides. Oh gosh, I think I will not be able to run through this. But just to say, in terms of BirdLife's priority as a regional conservation program, we want to support other African countries to have the same capacity like BirdLife South Africa, where we have mapped the most important places for biodiversity. We know the status of biodiversity. We know if biodiversity is declining. We know what are the pressures. Is the pressure mining? Is it development? Is it invasive species? And we use products like the IUCN Red List of Species, the Red List of Ecosystems, and key biodiversity areas to be able to support this kind of initiative. And lastly, this is my very last slide. What is the importance of identifying these most important places for biodiversity? This really helps to guide conservation priority setting. Like I said, we don't have enough money, but we need to know which species to really focus on so that they don't go extinct. Donors, some donors really prefer to work on species that are threatened, so they can put their money on those threatened species. It can really guide the expansion of protected areas. Like, you know, across Africa, most of our protected areas are mostly paper parks, or they have been declared mostly based on charismatic mammals, like your big mammals, like your elephants, your rhinos, but you've not really looked at your birds, your amphibians, and your other plants. So identifying those important places using the data that citizen scientists contribute can really help put protected areas in the right places. And then it can also be used by both private sectors to mitigate their risks on biodiversity. And lastly, it can be used to identify the most important places that countries need to be responsible for in terms of conserving biodiversity. And here are just some examples on birds, how this data is used. And we use it also for publishing like the state of the bird report for South Africa, where we want to know how the birds are doing. And all this again is really thanks to the information that this valuable network of citizen science produces on a yearly basis. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I had to rush through that. I thought we had much time, but yeah, I'm available to take questions.
Simi, you did an alarmingly good job with all of those slides. Well done. Okay. Does anybody want to weigh in and ask Simeon any questions?
I saw some chat was quite busy, but I don't know if there were questions in the chat.
Oh, we're about to boycott Total or Total.
Can I ask a question, please, Linda?
Sure, Duncan, go ahead.
My light's gone off, so you can't see me. I'm in the dark. I
wanted
to ask, you know, it seems to me, Simi, that most of the people that get into citizen science already have a bent for that. And are there enough people with that bent to kind of really make a difference? Shouldn't we be looking at kind of at school level, introducing into the syllabus of every school a curriculum around citizen science? I mean, it would be such an interesting kind of program for kids. I mean, they would just love it. And there's so many things they could do. There's practical work. Has BirdLife ever considered sort of investing money in writing a curriculum for school? I mean, you know, sometimes I just pull my hair out at the kind of lack of interest and, you know, ingenuity in our school systems. And this would be something so exciting. And it's no good just waiting for people, you know, that are older, that love science. You've got to really get everyone involved. So if you did it at a low level, you know, at school level, maybe you'd have 10 times the people when they leave school.
Absolutely spot on, Duncan. Absolutely spot on. I shared with you one of the examples, which was really a bio blitz that we did. But another BioBlitz that we did in the northern KwaZulu-Natal area was where we went out as biologists, not just botany or ornithologists, but insects experts. And we also went out, we went to a primary school, and it was really surprising. We actually identified a new insect species. We went to a primary school where we gave them the net. We gave school kids, these were kids below the age of 10 years, to just go out and collect insects. And it was amazing to see the number of insects that they brought back to us. And this is something that BirdLife has been thinking about. Even in the our awards that they give out, they always give it to a young aspiring conservationist that is coming up, and they're always in a school, in a school milieu. So what has been the challenge really is to be able to develop this curriculum, but BirdLife is really thinking about not only engaging the older folks, but also going to right down to the school level to be able to engage them and create some kind of awareness. You will see even in the bird fairs that we always have, you will see the exhibitions that the kids come into and look at it, they play with the binoculars. So those are some of the things to really motivate them to get into conservation. And some of them really pick it up. Yeah. I wish we could do more in terms of like writing that curriculum, but yeah, BirdLife is making some progress in terms of this.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Duncan. And certainly from BirdLife's perspective, what Simeon was talking about is the severe capacity restraint or constraint that we have at BirdLife. There are not enough hours, not enough hands, not enough people to do all the things that we believe are so important to actually yes, make a big dent in the declining populations of our, in our case, birds, but obviously all other biodiversity that Simeon represents. So Judy's saying, let's have a part 2 at some point. And I think that we just scratched the surface, Simeon, what you're able to offer and what you can speak about. I particularly am very interested in how regionally, how are you being able to impact the regions? You spoke about Kenya, and it sounds as though there's some movement there and some coordination of data collection. But is there anything that a bird club like Rand Barbet can do to assist, that you go, you know, if I had 5 people or 10 people who could do X, Y, and Z, we could change the world, for instance?
No, I think already most of the bird lovers are already doing so much. One, in terms of providing this data, like you see for some of the birds are not only restricted to South Africa. Some of them use migratory routes that span right up to other African countries, like some of those East Atlantic flyways, birds that use that flyway. And the contribution that you do already for providing that information in South Africa is super important in terms of informing what happens in other African countries. The biggest challenge, especially in terms of what is happening in other African countries, is the capacity and also the funding. Like you see in South Africa, there's a huge community of experts that are doing this kind of work. But if you go to other African countries, even very much linked to what Duncan said, it's mostly the elderly people. Some of them are retiring and they're not passing that information down to the next generation. So it really makes people to be really oblivious of what is happening in the environment, the birds, and what biodiversity actually does in terms of like the benefit it provides to society. So our biggest challenge so far has been the capacity and the funding, but through the program that I'm actually managing now with that head that resigned, we are trying to build capacity of a cohort of experts that will be able to take this work forward and make sure biodiversity is protected.
Okay, great. Well, that's very encouraging. I know that a few years ago, we spent quite some time bringing our club members up to speed with birdlasser. And I asked the question of those online whether you would be interested in having a bird lasser workshop. In other words, come and learn how to use bird lasser. We're all using some app to some degree. And I think what you've highlighted for me, just having come back from Namibia and Etosha, was how little information I personally collect, where every one of those fields could have been filled in so easily by me. So thank you. You've prompted me to provide much more generous information than just, tick, it's that bird. Was it a juvenile? Where was it, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for that. Any other questions for Simeon?
Certainly, there's a huge interest for part 2. We can look at how to develop this either in one of those when we meet in person, just to talk. Yeah, it can be very informal, just to talk about some of the conservation challenges across the African continent. And we can look at some birds or some animal species and really just discuss about them and what people are doing in terms of saving those species.
Great. Okay. I think that would be a wonderful initiative. It might be months before we meet again. Okay. So make sure that you grab Simeon when you see him next, and let's start this conversation, or let's get this conversation going, because I really feel that we can contribute. We are a bunch of interested volunteers, and I'd like us to be able to contribute to both your work and to ensuring that red data list is not increasing in terms of extinctions, but helping us to bring those numbers down. So thank you, everybody, for your attendance. Simi?
So, Linda, sorry, just in terms of the birds of South Africa, the red data book is going to be revised. We managed to secure some money from the French Development Agency, and you'll begin to see how all this information you've been collecting over the year is going to be used to revise the red list categories of those species. We really hope, like Linda said, that some of them will be decreasing, not increasing towards extinction. And yeah, we'll give you some valuable statistics once that project is finished.
Brilliant. Well, I thank you for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest and also your growing knowledge of birds. My goodness, Simeon hadn't seen more than 10 birds when we first met. So next time he'll be able to talk about those birds and have the right names.
I was so embarrassed. I was probably the least. I was a novice actually, but now if you hear I'm in an accident one day, just looking at birds, don't be surprised. It's so addictive.
Oh wow! It is indeed addictive, and I think you're preaching to the converted here. So I appreciate very much your time. Thank you very much. I know you've been on meetings all day, and so thank you for addressing us and for your attendance, everybody. Look forward to seeing you out there.
Thank you, everyone, and really looking forward to meeting you all in person. Thank you, Linda, for organizing.
Okay, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good evening.